Welcome to the From a Writer's Perspective channel, hosted by Leonard and me, Khyrian Storms. Last episode, we sailed off into our maiden journey across the fantastical universe of Estis, a world created by my co-host and writer Leonard. To celebrate the release of his first short story within this universe, we invite you behind the scenes to explore the writing process behind Trials of Thaxas, which is now available for free on talesofestis.com. But before we start, I'd like you to close your eyes as we transport you to another world. This is a segment of the first chapter of Trials of Estis called 11. The warbling of a charm of cold crops under the early autumn sun emphasized the silence that lingered over the Xakyria's courtyard like a muggy thundercloud. 11 gulped down his measured cup of blood broth and tore a chunk of the boiled snogleg with his teeth. He ignored the disdainful glances of his rivals 1, 5, 6, and 8 and sopped a piece of dark brown flatbread into his soup. The little birds on the eaves looked at him with skittish heads. After lunch, a deep peal of bells rolled through the broad street on the banks of the Xakyria river, along which lay the white-plastered Xakyria. In these barracks, young recruits from the ages of 5 to 15 were trained to become armed forces for the Batharian army. However, no one could prepare them for the initiation rite that awaited them. They eagerly devoured the last remnants of their scanty midday meal and made their ways to the training fields where free fights were scheduled. They arranged themselves in 3 rows of 4, their backs and faces straight, and gazed at infinity. Prepiton Zamenidos, a middle-aged man who had taken care of the youngsters after his time in the Batharian military and had spent the past 10 years preparing them for life as a warrior, began naming the numbers that served as their names until they had earned their true names in random order. Well, that was very exciting. But Leonard, before I let you tell what the short story is about, let me mention that besides writing the story, Leonard also produced the haunting soundscapes behind these segments, including music, which is, to me, very impressive. Now, Leonard, what is this short story about?
It's a love story in a society where love is a pragmatic thing and doesn't actually exist, and maybe is a little bit of a taboo. But yeah, so I got this protagonist who is in love with a girl, and I have an antagonist who is also in love with the same girl. But the Batharians are a sort of Spartans on steroids. So before they become a man, they have to do this trial, the Trial of Thaxas. And Thaxas is the god of thunder, like Thor or Zeus. So they're on the verge of going to these fields where lightning never stops. They believe Thaxas resides there. So they go there, and whoever returns first gets the girl, if they're on time.
Yeah, and whoever survives it is actually worthy of the strength of the Batharians.
Yeah, so when they survive the trial, they get 3 wives to make a lot of children, because when there's such a dangerous trial, then a lot of people die, of course. A lot of children, there are children at the point, so they die before they are 15.
It's a natural selection, literally.
Yeah, it's yeah, kind of a harsh natural selection based on their society. But yeah, they just need to make a lot of children, and the more children they go to this I called it Mouthaxas, the cradle of Thaxas. It's sort of a translation. The more children go there, the more will survive. That's actually just the basic idea.
And likely, of course, the longer this goes on, the stronger the overall people become.
Yeah, that's
I think
what
it's
they
also
believe.
that's kind of the ideology, right? Yeah. And you said 3 wives at that point. Before I go deeper into like actual story and lore, I kind of want to know, because you're a gardener. You're not an architect. You don't write out your plots fully, but you've mentioned this in episodes before. Usually, you know where to start, and you usually know your ending at some point.
Mm-hmm.
How much did you know before you got your story started? Which seeds did you plant, and what inspired that initial idea?
I think, yeah, it's a remnant of when we worked together. Yeah, I created this lore for, I think it was the Batharians back then. And I thought, okay, what would be the most dishonorable thing to do? And that is treason in the name of love. That's how I thought about it. And that's how I came with a story of two people that were in love, but somehow, yeah, I don't really know. I think I had the elements of two people being in love and the third one being in love.
So there was a love triangle.
Yeah, this love triangle, exactly. And the protagonist killing the other one, which was a very dishonorable thing to do. And that becoming the definition of treason in their society. But I didn't have Batharians back then. They had different names.
Well, you had the lightning test. You had because I believe that stemmed from our idea of Kargas's acolytes, right? We had the idea of elemental tests. And it wasn't the Trials of Thaxas yet, but I do think that was...
Exactly. Well, it's a bit of game inspired. Like when you have a game, there's usually a weapon which is infused with elemental damage. So you have the fire sword and the lightning whip and an ice shield, or I don't know.
Honestly, I would even say Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, probably.
Because it even feels like there's remnants of the Thunder Plains.
Yeah.
The Ixion. Kind of like having to fight Ixion to get his powers. Those little elements there, which was, in my opinion, quite unique, all of that. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of inspirations.
Yeah, it wasn't... I don't think I consciously used Final Fantasy, but I think it definitely played a role just in my subconscious mind. My fascination for lightning. What I do remember is seeing the Lichtenberg figures. There are these figures that one gets when struck by lightning, and I saw these and I thought, this is actually quite interesting. Having a people that are all covered in these branching figures on their body. And that's I remember having that idea. So it was combining all these different elements.
Gotcha. Okay, so that is what you started with when you started writing, and then you just filled in like how do you then take on that process as gardener? Like how do you just start writing and it just comes out, or?
Yeah, that's basically it.
That's how easy it is, basically.
Yeah, I just start writing, and yeah, it's just logical to go from one situation to another, and sometimes there's a little writer's block, but that's the benefit of a short story. You can just skip a time period and continue, and maybe when you go in editing mode, there might be a new idea which you can fit in between, but yeah, it's just start writing and go.
It's also just where your imagination takes you and your curiosity takes you a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Still then, in the grander scheme of things, I don't know if your strategy when you started this story was, I want to write short stories only about the Batharian Empire and kind of chronicle that. But as you're writing these 4 very different short stories that are coming up for this year, how do you decide where you want to start, which story you want to pick? Kind of the thing of, because if you write one story, it eliminates a lot of other stories. So how did you know that this is the story that you wanted to take on?
I don't know if I agree with that statement, because yeah, I think when you're Brandon Sanderson and you're doing 5 600-page novels in a year, then yeah, you're eliminating stories. But doing short stories, it doesn't take much time to complete them, and you can do whatever story you like. But yeah, and to answer your question, why did I start with this one? It's just the one I had. It was the only completed idea in my head that I kind of knew which way I wanted it to go, so I just started and didn't really have a reason behind it. It's just the one I had.
Fair enough. And so you start with this love triangle, you put them in a world. I think that part of it is created while we were writing Youth and a lot of other short stories and just developing that world, but then you give it a spin of your own, including I think Thaxas, we already had like some parts of it, but then how do you continue to drive this Pantheon?
Well, it all started with Thaxas. Part of the Batharians we invented back then, and the Batharians, the translation was lightning warriors or something, but it sounded too orcish, and I thought, nah, let's drop the Kroon and go with Batharians. It sounds a bit more neutral. But I thought, yeah, which god? It can be the only god. I wanted to have a greater pantheon, so I probably looked at the Greek pantheon, the Norse pantheon, and thought, who can I make the supreme god? And I decided to go with the sun. After that, it's this sort of game thinking. Which elements do you have? So you can have the sun. You can also have of course you have the Thaxas, the lightning god, but you have fire, ice, water, the woods. I think it was, I always say 12, but I think I have 14 gods, 14 realms and 14 gods of the Batharians.
These are clans, I think, right?
I think you can call them clans or countries or realms. But of course, within these countries, there will be people that have another opinion about how the gods want to see the world. And yeah, there will be fighting between them. It's a warmongering society, so there will be always war.
Gotcha. Picking up where we left the story, after the protagonist and antagonist have their first fight together, our protagonist has a tender moment with the love interest in the second chapter, and this takes place in the infirmary. After that, our protagonist leaves the Xakyria and marches out of the city with the rest of the procession. And this is where the story brings us to chapter 4, the Valley of the Myths. After 12 Batharian day marches, the procession was welcomed by the god king and queen named Ron and Has, who guarded the passage to the Faigamidors, the Valley of Myths. This vast mountainous landscape told of Batharian history, that of Thaxas in particular. The stone-cut gods and divine warlords watched over the tombs of fallen warriors and commanders. Besides gods, the stone effigies of past Kothons watched over the landscape, surrounded by the gleaming armor of the soldiers who had served under them. The time-marked valley in the Xakyria mountains, which Thaxas had struck in his rebellion against the king of gods, told of the bloodshed of hundreds of battles. It was a sacred place that Batharians had nothing but awe for. Honor and respect were the highest values of Batharian society, and there was nothing more honorable than dying in an equal battle where arms were crossed from man to man. Because of this warmongering, most Batharians did not make it past the age of 40. 11 looked at the statues in awe. Some he recognized from the history lessons taught to them by their martial teacher, others remained unfamiliar. The statues of the gods reached so high that the midday sun blinded them when he looked up. Some statues had been there for hundreds of years, weathered by time and overgrown with lichens and creepers. It was not clear where myth turns into history. To the left in the folds of the mountainous landscape rose Regos, the divine warlord who had separated the east from the west by sinking the ground into the sea with his warhammer, as Galtic tribes from the west stormed the Batharian lands. Elsewhere he saw Arion, also a divine warlord, who withstood hordes of foes for so long that the gods blessed his arrows as he fired it at the clouds, and a shower of solar flares engulfed the land. Khyroxos, the one-armed, the soldier left for dead on the battlefield after he lost his arm, scrambled up and became so proficient with one arm that he became one of the greatest Kothons to ever rule. You obviously have the antagonist and the protagonist already clashing there and having this friction. There's a fight, there's a lot of agony going through that place. How did you blend that feeling of agony with that lore building? Because I thought that was quite an interesting thing. There's this very inspired feeling, but there's also this very dreadful feeling, and it's a quite unique combination of two feelings in the same written text.
Yeah, I don't really know if I had that intention. Let me explain it in my way, and maybe you have some questions later, but I just like mountains, I like valleys. I still live in the Netherlands, and you lived in the Netherlands for a very long time, and also Belgium, and it's just all land is flat. So when I see mountains, I'm fascinated. When I see waterfalls, I'm fascinated. I just like nature a lot, so that's where I got the valley. Knowing that long marches can cause a lot of pain.
Yeah, especially after our attempts at the Kennedy March.
Yeah, it's 50 miles or 80 kilometers you have to complete in 20 hours. So that's
it's a challenge. It's a trial on itself.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. So yeah, and then I thought, okay, there are gods and there also have to be demigods or sort of human-like mythological figures. And I thought, okay, what are the values they uphold? And yeah, these values I humanized. So, for example, honor will be one, or power or discipline, and all these different elements I created a humanized figure for. Yeah, so they see all these statues, and it's to remind them of, yeah, these are the values you should uphold.
I think it's also quite apparent that they, as at least a clan or an empire, want to create these things to create the feeling that they can at some point become that. That's also why they have birthing wives and singing wives, and the ones that sing their big tales, their heroic tales, almost has to give them the idea that they are those mythical beings. It has to create those legends, those myths.
Yeah, exactly. And also at a point in this valley of myths, they find this sort of mound with all these swords and spear points. And this is something I thought of recently when developing the Pantheon a little bit further. That when a soldier or almost soldier, the kids that go on this trial, when they find these swords, they need to pay respects to them and clean them, so they will always be shining and they will not rust. And then, yeah, I recently thought, what do they do this for? And there will be this end war, and they believe that, yeah, a soldier's soul will be attached to a sword. And when this sort of resurrection happens, and the most evil god will rise again, that the gods will resurrect the souls of all fallen soldiers, and they get their swords back, and they will fight the sort of Satan-like god.
And how is this linked to, for instance, the Eternal Arena, which is that's where this story ends, basically?
The Eternal Arena, it's sort of a limbo-like place where they can reside after their death, and where they can fight and feast with the gods until the final battle happens.
It's basically a little bit of like Ragnarok or something happening, and the ship and them just sitting on the ship on their way to the big fight. And that's
it's a sort of Valhalla. That's what it is. A sort of Valhalla.
Okay, fair enough. That makes sense. It quite connects a few dots. So we have a lot of world building already in a short story. It's really dense, and also I really like this idea of how that the Trial of Thaxas, which everything is like, that's the plot. How you have this pilgrimage basically across the Valley of the Myths. You go to this place where you basically challenge yourself, but you let yourself get struck by lightning. If you survive, you get this nice lightning tattoo, this Lichtenberg figure on your back. You get your name, and you get back. You go back to society to choose the person that sings your legends, the one that births your kids. It's basically just 3 wives that you get. But then we have 6 and 11 in there. And while it's very collectivist as a society, 6 and 11 feel like very big individuals within this story. So especially if you have to, 11 more than 6, because 6 is always kind of shielded by a group of his friends, his like other horrible people. Like these are just like bullies. So how did you, especially knowing that 11 had to be such an individualist and an individual that kind of confronts this society, how did you determine what his character would be? And then the characteristics of both 6 and 11?
Well, I decided that this society and especially the male characters all have to be this stoic, disciplined, maybe a little bit also the Unsullied from George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
And a bit of Spartan. So I think it's actually a stereotype that they don't say much. They say what needs to be said, and for the rest, yeah, they shut up. Yeah, I think it's also a bit of my personality.
Yeah, and you're not a very hedonistic person. You can be quite happy with the bare minimum. It's kind of like reflecting a little part of yourself into that society, but then 11 is kind of stands, he's not a hedonistic person, but he does stand against. He's an individualist within a collective society.
Yeah, I don't know if he's really individualist, because he wants to fight for the Kothan, which is the highest ranking officer in the Batharian Empire. He's just in love, and yeah, he wants to be with the girl more than he wants to fight in a war that he didn't choose for. So that's basically his motivation. And 6 being the coward that he is, escaping the trial and faking the tattoo, going back to the girl before 11 does.
It also shows that following the rules set by a society, the constraints that society shows, those rules can definitely sometimes not help an individual to succeed and get closer to happiness.
Yeah, it's just the death of the author. Everyone can read what they want.
Yeah, I think that's in the nature of every story where you find your own meaning in it. I want to backtrack to a part of the story where they get struck by lightning. It's the middle part of the whole story and one of the most essential segments of Trials of Thaxas. I do have a question about how you came up with late Mouthaxas and the actual trial. But before we dive into that, I want to reference a segment of chapter 5. So Leonard, if you would start the music. Oides swallowed the land and withdrew again. Hours passed like this. The clouds had gathered and now the rain fell heavily. Fear and impatience kept him in a stranglehold, especially at the moment that he was knee-deep in seawater, filled with floating corpses and could no longer see the path. His instincts begged him to run, but he wasn't a coward like Six. He trudged nervously towards the epicenter, where more and more boys stood cussing and cursing into the sky. Suddenly, Thaxas threw a bolt of celestial fire at a group of boys who were walking slightly ahead of him. The whole group of unsuspecting boys fell down. One of them tensed and fell sideways into the water along the path they walked. The fetid, sulfuric swamp water bubbled, and now and then the muddy water belched up splashing bubbles. Levin ran towards the boy and pulled him out of the water. He reeked of swamp water and rot and was covered in a thick layer of mud and algae. Besides his bruised skin, he suffered a few other injuries. Levin pulled the strands off of him and placed his hand on his chest, wrist and neck. No heartbeat. He began to press on the boy's chest as he had been taught. The boy came to, groaning, began to flail around wildly. I can't see! I can't see! Calm down. It's only temporary. Levin tried to reassure him.
Why did you bring me back to life? They will kill me if I return to them as a blind man!
The boy screamed in panic and flailed about some more, and Levin decided to leave him to his own devices. It was the best he could do. He was soaked. More hours had passed, and it was late at night at this point. Then suddenly, he felt a tingling deep underneath his skin. Instinctively, he closed his eyes, put his hands over his ears, and crouched. He heard the words of summon idols. Squat, heels, ears. Then Thaxas' flaming fist struck his shoulder. Even behind his eyelids, he saw the blinding flash. With a deafening bang, a shocking, excruciating pain, his body tensed and he lost consciousness.
Well, first of all, like we explained, I think, in previous episodes, we wanted to create a fantasy world without magic. So I thought, okay, that's something I still want to do. I aim to have no magic in my world. But how can I make real places magical? And then I found Lake Catatumbo in Venezuela, which is a lake where lightning never stops. I thought, yeah, there are just magical places on Earth which have no explanation, and yeah, I can use this, and that's how I can put a little bit of magic in my world without it being really magic. Because I made it this sort of marsh-like landscape, so it could be methane going in the air, or I don't know how it works. I think scientists also have never found out why Lake Catatumbo works the way it does, but it's just there, and that's all I need to create this lake. So that's something I wanted to explain as well.
So after 11 gets struck by lightning and he survives, he finds someone on the field and that person is, I believe, blinded and just fried. He tries to help him. So they go to the tower of the Xakyria. And that actually brings us to another segment, the final one. Before them was the pointed marble tower of the Xakyria. The flutes in the heavy columns were inlaid with sapphire, a gem that glowed blue in the static sky. A line of 12 Khyraxes stood guard in front of the entrance. Their eyes followed the visitors menacingly from behind their skull masks, a saber-toothed tigran from the jungles of northeast. Their hands rested on the hilt of the Kaitor, the sword that touched the ground with the point. Behind their cloak of black and white striped tigran skin, they remained hidden. Whoever returned injured too badly was blocked with crossed swords and killed right there on the spot. 11 and 7 were allowed to pass without any problems, although 11 briefly feared for his companion's life. The Xakyria inside looked even more terrifying than the guards, with not the skulls of a predator on their heads, but the skull of a primeval deer, with fist-sized lanterns full of blue sparkflies projecting on the wide 16th pointed antlers. Here and there were bones tucked into their long frayed robes, and they wore a chain of teeth, tusks and bones that rattled with every step, though the ghostly figures seemed more likely to float in their trailing robes. One of the ominous skulls with blue-lit eyes approached 11 and 7. A slight reverence set everything in the antlers rattling into motion. Or what inspired it?
It's a seer. I try to be a little bit like Tolkien, but in a much inferior form. Try to invent the language, meaning Za for lightning, and Kyria, like seeing, the lightning readers or lightning seers.
Explain for people that haven't read the story. Like the Xakyria, they have this quite scary, they're this quite of dooming presence, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, but it's just psychological. It's to invoke awe.
Yeah.
And when you see this big skull-like thing with rattling bones on their robes, yeah, it does something with you, especially when you've just been struck by lightning. And it's just belief. When whole society believes that these people can foresee the future, or read in the branches the lightning struck what your name is and what your future will be, then yeah, it's people believe in God, people believe in whatever they want to believe in.
Yeah, what I also liked is it almost felt like going through this big trial and then being accepted to the gates of heaven, where there's someone that kind of guides you back to the part where you're welcomed as a hero.
Mm.
Almost like Hercules has this as well, I think, in the where he gets to, like, I don't know if it's Hercules. I know that there's like multiple stories where there's been this big trial, this big challenge, and then afterwards they get welcomed to the gates, and then they go back to the place where they came from, kind of like the hero's journey.
Yeah, it's actually a hero's journey in a short story form.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating, and obviously we won't spoil the ending because I think that people should just read the story itself. We've heard some snippets throughout the episode to kind of give you a feeling of what the story is like and what you can expect. For this story, you set yourself a challenge as well. You limited yourself to 10,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do this? And what was the biggest challenge as well by actually getting beneath like the 10,000 word limit?
Well, it's that's also the reason why it's so lore dense. You don't have to elaborate in all these adjectives. He drank from a golden with rubies laden chalice. No, it's just he drank from the cup and whatever. Also, the way people say things, it's just compact. Make everything a little bit more compact and just cut out all the unnecessary things.
It's quite a minimalistic approach to writing, a less floral way of getting the story across.
And of course, I understand that when you need to write a novel or just a big story, that you can do all these things. But I just wanted to. Well, I'm quite minimalistic in my approach. I always have been. But when I write bigger stories, I tend to put a little more flowery language in it. But for this, it was just to challenge myself to be as on point as possible. I did cut out some content at some point when he survived the trial, and he went back to his village or to his city. He came through this wood and he found a hut laying in ashes, and it turned out that 6 had run from the trial and faked his tattoo, and there was this kid with a cleft lip. 11 helped him avenge his grandfather who 6 killed, but the kid kid had a cleft lip, and I tried to write the dialogue as him having a speech impediment. But everyone I let read the story was like, yeah, it was a cool story, but that part, yeah, I didn't really understand it. And I was like, yeah, maybe it's just unnecessary and I can cut it out. Maybe I can use it later, or it's just trial and error.
An extended version on like a Patreon or something.
Yeah, I might do that.
Or on your website.
Put a little bit of more cut content. I also let him have a dream, which I also cut out. There were a few parts that just, had too much words.
Also didn't do much for the story itself.
Yeah, exactly.
We've talked about that exercise in minimalism quite extensively.
Mm-hmm.
I think that applies here as well, that when I was reading the story, I know the part of the farm that they went past and it was burnt down, and that boy that basically helped him then back to his town with the speech impediment.
Yeah.
And I know that we were talking about how in Wuthering Heights you also have people that you can barely understand and they have like an accent and there's this choice of wording. I totally get why it was in there. I just feel that without it, it worked just as well, even better.
Yeah, and it was also to show how
the world treats people with an speech impediment or like a physical limitation.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think it was also Spartans who threw babies down a mountain if they weren't good. So that was something the Batharians did as well. And I wanted to show that, but it didn't work out the way I planned it, so I just got it out.
This also feels a bit like your writer's process, that you, because you're a gardener, you just full out write the whole story and you don't limit yourself with how many ideas you push in there, and then you later decide what actually helps the story and what doesn't, despite knowing that that's there.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be a third or fourth draft, which is very lore heavy, and then we get to a fourth or fifth draft that kind of has, I don't know, it's definitely a lot, 2,000 words that get cut out either way. Just lore.
Yeah, I think I had 7 drafts in total.
It's also because I obviously read it, we translate it, and in translations we find that certain things don't work. There's so many reasons why there's so many drafts, but I think that part of me being involved in that process a little bit as well, and also having to go from Dutch to then English, I think that helps with further fine-tuning it.
Yeah, definitely.
Other things that you would like to share about this story before we finalize this little deep dive into Trials of Thaxas?
Yeah, without spoiling the ending too much, it was a little bit inspired by Gladiator.
Also, very tragic story. Yeah.
I think that's all the only thing I need to say. It's
very Edie Leonard.
Well, I think this is actually the only story I have in this.
I don't know. I think that in that sense, I think there's a very clear reason why in the Pantheon, Thaxas and Faustus are brothers. And the story of the Fire of Faustus and the Trials of Thaxas, they feel like companion pieces. They feel like brothers, as in this quadrilogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the beginning and the end, the alpha, the omega.
Exactly, and it does feel that they're both tragedies, while the other two stories are very, like, a bit more hopeful stories. Daughters of Hes and they're more about creation and building up than the destruction of a certain lifeline.
I don't even know if this one is really a tragedy because of their belief system. He knows he's been tried by the gods and he's been deemed worthy, and it's only the humans that condemn him, but he knows he will be with his
lover in the eternal arena.
Yeah, he knows he will be with his wife in the afterlife. So I don't know if it's a tragedy.
It's a very grounded. I think that's also a way to describe your writing style. It's grounded fantasy. Highly recommend for anyone listening, despite all you know now, to go through the experience, read Trials of Thaxas, once again on talesofestis.com. The next time we will dive into one of Leonard's stories will be about the Fury of the Chimeron, which will be released quite soon, I think.
I hope this month.
Yeah. Either way, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the video, consider liking it and perhaps even subscribing, as this would greatly help us grow the channel. See you in the next one.